Welcome everyone to the Xavier Health Third Thursday Lunch and Learn series. I know many of you have joined us in the past, but some of you are new. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Marla Phillips. I'm Director of Xavier Health. I come from the pharma industry, and we bring this webinar series to you each month, every third Thursday, as the name would imply, to kind of give you, I guess, a perspective on a topic that you might not normally hear about. But yet it's a topic that would influence what you do every day without directly recognizing that in some cases. And so today is no different, and I'm glad to be able to have this webinar session with you. But before we start, I wanted to talk about a couple things. First of all, we are recording this session, so the recording will be available on our website, as is every other month except last month, where we intentionally did not record that session. The slides from today will also be made available on the website. The other thing I want to point out is we would like to do a Q&A session at the end. So if at any point during the session a question comes up in your mind, go ahead and type it up in your GoToWebinar panel. There's a Q&A panel there where you can type in your question. It will come directly to us. It will not distract the speaker. So I would encourage you that as soon as you think of the question, go ahead and submit your question to us. The other thing I'd like to do is take a moment to share with you what our mission is. Our mission at Xavier Health, we are within Xavier University, but everything we do is with industry and the FDA. So our mission is inspiring collaboration, leading innovation, and making a difference. And for those of you who have not joined us previously, here's an idea of what we do and how we do it. We have over 150 pharmaceutical professionals, medical device professionals, and FDA officials formally engaged with various activities that we do. So we have 2 FDA co-sponsored conferences. We have the Pharma Conference in March of every year and the Device Conference in May of every year. We were asked to start the Combination Products Summit and have FDA, the Director of the Office of Combination Products, on our committee. We were just recently asked to start an annual cybersecurity summit, which we will be doing in October of this year. And we have the Medical Device Leaders Forum in October as well. We just launched the Xavier Center for Artificial Intelligence, and if you are interested in being involved, I believe part of the survey after today's session asks if you're interested in getting more information about that. But we will have a kickoff summit in August where we will identify work streams and identify teams to start developing output related to artificial intelligence for quality, supply chain, and regulatory affairs. We have a supply chain initiative where we developed good supply practices for the global pharma and device industries. We co-led the device metrics initiative with FDA. We launched a metrics initiative in the pharma industry with PricewaterhouseCoopers and simultaneously worked on how to measure culture, which we successfully did. And we have down below development work. We have the Xavier Medical Device Leaders Certificate Program that feeds into the forum that I talked about up above. And then I have highlighted in green because you just might be familiar about our Third Thursday Lunch and Learn series, since that's what we're doing right now. So obviously every third Thursday of every month. And we have an on-demand medical device training toolbox to support the device industry. So as I mentioned, we have the Xavier Center for Artificial Intelligence, and we're looking to advance the predictive capabilities of the industry. And our scope is going to span beyond where it typically is being used right now. Typically, artificial intelligence is being used to look at clinical trials data, as well as diagnostics, so diagnosing depression and dementia, for example. But we're looking at taking that and expanding into quality operations, regulatory affairs, and supply chain to get more robust information in the hands of people making decisions on what to do with the products as they're being released to the market. The core team for that includes FDA, IBM Watson Health, and we actually have Eli Lilly as of yesterday on the core team, as well as other pharma and device company representatives, and also have Dell involved with us now. So I hope you can join us for our first annual summit, August 24th and 25th at Xavier. So with all that as a background, today we're here for the Third Thursday Lunch and Learn for May, and I will be conducting an interview of Michael Johnson, who is Vice President at Eli Lilly in Business Development, and Michael has been with Eli Lilly for 17 years. He started with Lilly in 2000. And again, just want to thank you, Michael, for being with us today.
Yes, Marla, thank you for the introduction, and glad to be here.
Okay, great, thank you. And so, of course, the topic that you're going to be talking on today is the inside story on mergers and acquisitions, the risks, the impact, and other options. And the reason we're doing this is because we see so many mergers and acquisitions happening. It's a pretty prevalent business model going on out there. And as we take a look at that, I took a step back and I wonder, even personally, does it ever really pan out the way it's touted in the news? Does it ever work out? There's a lot of churn and chaos that occurs inside a company through all of that. And so what's the output? And so I'm really glad that you're here, Michael, and can give us your perspective on mergers and acquisitions and other options that are available. So with that, the first question I have is, what are some reasons why corporations explore mergers and acquisitions to begin with?
Yeah, sure. And I guess broadly, you can ask the question of, build versus buy. And, when should you try and establish an internal capability from scratch? And when should you go out and try to buy that capability or that technology? And I think that's, the broader question. And as we think about it, we divided things into really two broad perspectives about considering an acquisition. And this slide lays those out. And we divided them into kind of a proactive approach and reactive. I think proactive really I would categorize as the standard growth approach that companies look at. And reactive is more of a situational problem that you find yourself in, and you're trying to solve that issue. But on the proactive side, we looked at things like, do you want to expand in a new therapeutic area or a new area of innovation? And again, one approach you could take as a company is to try to build that, hire the expertise, et cetera, or you can go out and acquire that. And so the benefits of an acquisition in that scenario would be capabilities and expertise, but also speed. An acquisition may enable you to get into that therapeutic area much faster. The second proactive approach could be to reach a patient or a customer group that maybe you don't have access to right now. Maybe you have some approaches or some products for those groups, but you're looking to expand that. So you can look at buying products to get into that area. And also just in general, technological capabilities, whether that's on the manufacturing side or on the discovery side. It's really more of a platform-based technology approach you're trying to get into. And again, all these could be good and valid reasons why you're seeking an acquisition. And again, be more proactive about it, maybe a little more on the hunting side rather than the gathering side, if you will. I think if a company knows clearly what they want, that tends to work out more effectively. On the reactive side of things, again, this is just more situational. And what is the issue you're trying to solve here with an acquisition, and how do you think that can help you? And again, a variety of reasons that you may explore in this category also. One could be things like pipeline gaps, be that early stage, late stage, et cetera. Maybe you had a number of projects, maybe they didn't pan out according to plan. So you look at acquisitions and business development as kind of a gap-filling exercise that you need to engage in. And that could be on the pipeline side, or the second bullet there is more on the revenue side. If a product isn't performing as well, if it's delayed in the regulatory review cycle, you may have a sales force that has extra capacity, so you're trying to fill that with revenue. Those tend to be more difficult to do. I think if you look at what's out there in the industry, later stage pipeline opportunities or revenue generating opportunities are few and far between. I think the earlier you go in the life cycle of a product, the more successful you're likely to be. So things in the early clinical space, they're more prevalent. You can get better geographic rights typically. Maybe the prices aren't quite as high, although that's changing a little. But I think it's easier to do deals for earlier based technologies. And then some other problems you may run into. One is just business model sustainability. Maybe you're more of an innovation-based company and that's not working out, so you're looking to expand it into things like generics or consumer health or something like that. Maybe there could be geographic problems you're trying to solve, or if it's a market where critical mass is more important and it's more of a cost play you're trying to get into. Maybe it could be excess capacity you're trying to take advantage of. So again, variety of reasons you can look at an acquisition both proactively and reactively, but I think that the key to either is knowing what you want and being disciplined about your approach.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so what is your opinion on the effectiveness of mergers and acquisitions? So as I was saying at the very beginning, do they ever really work out as they are touted or as the company hopes that they will be?
Yeah, that's a good question. The easy answer is, it just depends, and depends on a variety of factors. I think broadly speaking, there's been a lot of data about this, and Harvard Business Review had an article a couple of years ago about it, but most acquisitions aren't successful, and success being defined as an adequate return for the price you paid for the acquisition target. And if you look at our industry, I think a big driver of that, of course, is risk, and the technology perhaps didn't pan out as you thought, or perhaps the revenue that you anticipated didn't come into play. Perhaps you ran into pricing problems, or maybe there was synergy with your own product line you thought you could take advantage of that didn't work out. The number of customers didn't pan out, who knows. Or also things that could be delayed in the regulatory review cycle. So you were hoping to get some of those cost synergies or some of those revenue benefits earlier, and maybe things got delayed, and so the time value of money might have hurt you on that acquisition price. So a lot of things can go wrong in these things, and I think a big driver of that for pharma is just the degree of risk that our business has. And I know many companies have acquired things in the earlier stages of development, and they didn't pan out as anticipated. I think as listed here, again, we've mentioned this before, the key is to do things that are on strategy and ideally that touch on your areas of expertise as a company. The benefits of acquisition is getting perhaps into areas where you're not in today, and you can get there faster, but the risk would be you might be getting into areas where you don't have a great deal of expertise. So your ability to actually value that technology may be a bit challenged, and that's one of the risks of buying things versus build. In terms of trying to de-risk things, we try to look at things like earn-out payments or contingent value right payments. Those can be difficult to negotiate. Many times the company you're acquiring will just want all of that up front. So obviously there's a negotiation point there, but to the extent you can structure the acquisition somewhat like a license, where there are contingent downstream payments, maybe at the next stage of development or at regulatory submission. You can even try and explore sales earn-outs or milestone payments. So to the extent you can do those kinds of things, that would work. I think too, the larger the acquisition, the more risk you're going to run into. On the pharmaceutical side, Lilly has tended to stay away from large-scale M&A. As an innovation-based business, we don't think that makes you necessarily more innovative. It just gives you a larger growth platform or a larger platform you need to grow from, so it almost creates more challenges. But I think if you're looking at a large-scale size deal, then obviously that's going to be more risk to eventual success. And I think it's important to remember too that acquisitions aren't the only way to get access to external innovation. There's lots of ways to get access to things. So be disciplined about whether M&A is the best approach, or are there other things you should try to explore with the company you're talking to.
Right, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was really excited about having you join us today. Is I don't believe that M&A is a core business or business process for Eli Lilly. So it's interesting to have your take on mergers and acquisitions, and really taking a look at what other options are available. And I think it's interesting too that a lot of companies look at mergers and acquisitions of, okay, maybe our core business is declining, and so if we acquire someone, it'll give us more growth opportunity. But when you do that, along with it comes the expectations from the analysts and the investors that, okay, that the growth of the other company is already a given. That doesn't make you better. You now have to meet growth for that arm of your business too. So it adds a lot of stress to an organization, to their business, and every system within their company, and you have to demonstrate growth, not just, okay, we're now bigger. That doesn't necessarily help. It actually probably makes it more complicated.
Yeah, that's a good point, and they can be quite disruptive. And when I talk to my big pharma brethren at other companies that have engaged in large-scale acquisitions, that's exactly what they say. There's turnover, people are distracted, there's significant integration work going on, no one's quite sure where people will land in terms of responsibilities or what therapeutic areas may come and go. So large acquisitions like that can be quite distractive. And again, we have tended to shy away from those at Lilly. We've been reasonably acquisitive, though, over the years. We need to get better at it and do more of these. I think it's been a focus of our senior management here recently. And this spring we closed on the Touted Pharmaceuticals acquisition, which we're excited about, focused on the migraine space. So we certainly look at acquisitions, but again, have stayed away from the large scale, say over 20, 25, $30 billion kind of deals. We tend to shy away from those.
Yeah, those are pretty big. Okay, all right, thank you. So the next question is, if mergers and acquisitions are not perhaps at the core, then what are some typical business development options that are available, and when might each one be the right decision?
Sure. Yeah, when companies ask me, well, gee, what is Lilly's preferred approach? Generally, what we'll say is more of a traditional license type agreement. That if it's our choice on what we do, that's generally where we'll start. And we do far more many licensing agreements than we do acquisitions. And many times the company will approach us and they want to be acquired. So sometimes that's the only deal structure or option of choice. But we've listed here a few that we've done over the years. All these are also available to you. Of course, we have M&A listed at the top. You can also explore joint ventures as a possibility. We tend not to see a lot of these. They can be complicated to set up. You need to think about things like who's on the management team, who's on the board of directors for the joint venture, how will you split things. That can be complicated, especially in markets outside of the U.S., because maybe there's some cost that could be complicated to track. And then how do you end the joint venture? Does one side buy the other out? How does that work? So we'll see these on occasion, but they are fairly rare. As I mentioned, licensing is our general approach for external innovation, and we could do a straight kind of in-license where it's upfront milestones, royalties, etc., and the company that we're licensing from then would just be more of a financial partner. But we have to be flexible, and many companies don't want to just be a silent financial partner. They want to play an active role in development or commercialization. So we're pretty flexible with these kind of approaches, and we've done co-development deals where both parties share in the cost of development. We've done a variety of different co-promotion kind of agreements also. And I think the key, as I mentioned, is just flexibility in really trying to understand what the partner may want out of the deal and responding to that strategically on our end also. Another approach is equity investments. You can look at these, and you don't necessarily need to buy the company, but maybe a small equity stake might make sense for both sides. And maybe you can get a board observer seat out of that so that you could play an active role in monitoring progress, but you don't necessarily own the entire company. And tied to equity also could be things like taking advantage of your venture capital investments. Lilly has Lilly Ventures and Lilly Asia Ventures on the venture capital side. So we've made a number of VC investments with different companies that again gives us a window into cutting edge technologies and what's going on out there. You could also team up with other VCs to try to form organizations, and we've done that as well. That's actually how Touted was started. Lasmiditan, the migraine product that CoLucid developed, was a former Lilly asset, and we spun that out and started CoLucid several years ago. And so that's another avenue to explore. In terms of asset purchases, we don't see these a lot. These tend to be tend to have tax disadvantages to them. So we do see them once in a while, but not very often. And then the last one that I've listed here is options. And this is when you pay, give a payment for the right to the option, but then that option is exercisable upon some point in the future. So say it's an early in development and you can have an option, say at the start of phase 2. We've done some of these. We also try to pre-negotiate those option rights, so it's pretty clear upon option exercise what the payments would be and how things look going forward. But you got to look at different things. Acquisition is, I mentioned, one way to get access to things. There are others, and I think it's just important that you think through and explore your different avenues here before you settle on one approach.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I mean, and some of those I hadn't really even heard of, especially the options one. So it makes sense that you need to diversify your approach because situationally it might be right in one situation and not in the other. And then also not to get stuck with the same business model and then have issues with that, and now it cuts across everything that you're doing. You have issues with everything. So,
sure.
so that's great. Thank you for that description.
Yep.
Okay.
And as I mentioned,
as
I mentioned too, the other party needs to be open to these kind of approaches too. So just because you may want one of those different structures doesn't necessarily mean the other party is open to that also.
Right. Good point. Yes. All right. Thank you. So then the last question I have is basically, what are your closing thoughts on business development in the pharma and device industries?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, don't focus on one deal type. Be flexible. How you start one deal type may not be how you end. So you could start discussions that are more geared towards an acquisition that may flip to a license, or vice versa. Maybe the company starts off thinking their preferred approach is a license also, but as they have discussions with other companies, maybe it then starts to flip to an acquisition. So you need to be flexible along the way. Be very disciplined. Know exactly why, especially on the acquisition front, given the risks, but know why you were buying that company. What is it you're trying to get out from that company? Is it people? Is it a specific asset? Is it a capability or technology platform? I mean, know why you're buying it, and then be very disciplined about your walk away. It's somewhat easy to get, you don't want to lose the deal, and so egos get involved, and so you start to bid things up in a competitive auction, but you have to be very disciplined, and ultimately if the price exceeds what you think fair value is, you need to be disciplined in backing out of that auction process. So I think that's critical. Think a lot about post-merger integration. It's critical to deal success, and it needs to start very early. And so as you move along through confidential review of a particular company and you engage your technical diligence people and corporate diligence people, that's really when integration starts. And they need to start thinking about post-closing, what are the key things you're going to focus on for the integration over what period of time, and ensuring that those things are addressed. And if there are no deal breaking problems, but things you need to start sooner rather than later, you want a list of that for your integration leader, and you want your integration leader involved very early in the deal so that they can see things from the start. And then just the last bullet here is, I've certainly found this being in business development in pharma. I've been in our business development group about 10 years now, and it always amazes me what a small BD world it is. And you see people all the time that have changed companies or that have come back to you with one deal you did, and then they'll be back for another. You catch up with people at conferences and things. So it's important to remember that as you're going through the negotiation process, that the person you're negotiating with could very well be the same person you're negotiating with at a different company or even within that same organization. So it's important to maintain those relationships as you move along.
Oh, that's great advice. Okay, great. Well, thank you. So, Michael, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate that you are willing to take some questions. So, thanks for sharing all of that insight, and I know that we have a couple of questions at least. So, I'll ask the team at Xavier if they have any questions ready that they can read from the attendees.
Yes, thank you very much. So the first question we have is, can you please provide insight on due diligence processes specifically related to compliance, quality, and regulatory areas? What are critical takeaways in those areas?
Sure. So when we do diligence, we tend to separate them into technical diligence and corporate diligence. And technical would be those items you've listed there. We actually have a group at Lilly that does diligence on a full-time basis. They don't do all the functional work, but they manage the functional representatives on the technical side. And so they'll look broadly across everything from regulatory to CM&C to toxicology, et cetera. That also would include the legal diligence around intellectual property. And it's a very thorough group. A number of functions are cross-represented as part of that work. And they would do technical diligence for both licensing agreements as well as acquisitions. And so they will typically start off via e-room diligence and then site visits as necessary. There may be third-party site visits factored in also. So that's a kind of a well-oiled machine, if you will, on the technical diligence side. And they'll identify risks, gaps. If there are gaps, how can we close them? And then we have a separate group then that would do corporate diligence in an acquisition. And these would be things that you typically would not do in a license agreement. So you'd be looking at things like corporate facilities or HR kinds of diligence items or corporate legal matters. So it's a separate group that does corporate diligence. And then what we do is bring the technical and the corporate together in an acquisition, and then, as I mentioned, identify any key risks, key problems, and then how should the deal be structured to address them. And then also those things feed into the ultimate integration plan that you want to focus on post-closing.
And Mike, this is Marla. So I have a question based on what you were just describing there. So with some of these deals, actually probably most of them, if not all of them, that there's certainly a period of time where it's very confidential that the deal is even being considered. So how do you involve the cross-functional groups, or do you have a separate team that, like for example, your typical head of quality managing quality for Eli Lilly is not involved in the due diligence, but somebody who comes from a quality background represents the due diligence process? Or, I mean, how do you manage that? And then also, once you start it, what kind of access do you get to the information before you actually sign a deal with the company?
Yeah, so when we kick off a diligence team, we start by very clearly and carefully describing the fact that this is a confidential review. And especially if it's a public company, you want to be very careful about who you involve. And we manage that very carefully across our compliance organizations and as part of our confidential data review. And many times, if we have to separate that from people internally that are working on something similar, we will do that. But we're very careful in how we manage that flow of confidential data and confidential information. And the distribution of that is carefully controlled via SharePoint sites, et cetera, that only select people have access to. So you got to be very careful with how you do that. And then what we typically would do is start, if an opportunity comes in, we would start with a non-confidential summary just to avoid these kind of problems. So we'll start with that, make sure we still are interested, then we'll move to a confidentiality agreement and then go from there. And then typically anymore, it starts with a pretty extensive data room review from people. And so people that have access to that data room know very well the fact that we're in a confidential situation, so they manage that flow of that information very carefully. And then as it moves along, we only involve people on a need-to-know basis as the deal moves along up through contract.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, Michelle, is there another question?
Yes, there is. We talked about pre-merger, but now there's a question. Is there a recommended approach for the post-integration activities to reduce compliance risk?
Yeah, for your integration plan, again, it starts and flows from your diligence findings, and it's important to have a full-time integration leader, especially on larger acquisitions, because it can be quite a comprehensive job. But whether it's compliance risk or other types of risk, you want to manage that plan and almost have, deal plus 24 hours, deal plus 2 days, deal plus a week, deal plus a month, deal plus 6 months. I mean, what are your specific goals that you have for that integration or for that integration plan over a set time period? And you need to very carefully manage that as you move along. But it starts again with your diligence findings, which really help drive what the key areas key functional areas you will focus on as part of that integration work.
Yeah, and so this is Marla. So interestingly, at our device conference earlier this month, Francis Blaka, head of global quality for devices at Eli Lilly, gave a presentation on exactly that. So we do actually have that presentation available on the MedCon website if anyone wants to access that, because he was talking about integration in a session where they were addressing what do you do when your contract manufacturer receives a warning letter. So part of that was, well, how do you set yourself up for success to begin with so you hopefully don't get in that situation, and the integration process even just across a contract organization type of arrangement. So he actually has some slides that are really nicely laid out on a process that you could use as a starting point, I guess, for whoever asked the question. So interesting that it was Francis from Lilly who gave that presentation. So be a good resource. Michelle, is there another question?
So not at this moment.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, I have a question. It's one that I had when I first reached out to you, Michael, to see if you would be willing to do this presentation. When I talked about, does it ever really turn out the way it's supposed to? One of the things I was wondering is, from an analyst standpoint, from the investors, when they, how do they react when there's the announcement of an acquisition? And you can see the stock move, for example. So, for example, does the acquiring company, does the stock go down, and the company being acquired, does their stock go up, or vice versa, or is there really it's just a mixture? So how do investors react?
Yeah, first off, on the company being acquired, yeah, there'd be a premium involved above their current share price. So you'd see that stock, come close to what the acquisition price is almost immediately. That's the typical reaction. And then on the acquiring company side, investors will want to know who are you buying, obviously, what price did you pay, what value are you seeing in that company, why do you think a premium is justified? If you assume that the capital markets are efficient and that companies are fairly valued, what do you know, acquiring company, that current shareholders do not? How does this technology fit with your organization? You need to have your investor relations team prepped well for Q&A from investors, because you will get phone calls that come in. And so based on how investors see the benefits and the price you're paying, that's what your ultimate stock price reaction would be. And sometimes you'll see very, very fast over or under reactions, but then over time or throughout the day or the following day, as investors get used to why you did the deal or understand more of the rationale behind it, things may level out. But again, it just kind of depends really on how investors are viewing the deal you just did and what you paid, and how has that fit in with the strategy that you've been discussing with them in the past.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Michael, I think that's all the questions we have. So again, I just want to thank you so much for your time today, for the insight you provided, and really just giving us a perspective that we don't typically hear about in our everyday work. So your message has been very valuable. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. Glad to be with you.
Great. And then for everyone on the line, thank you for joining us. I hope you can join us next month, the third Thursday in June. We are going to have Dr. Linda Gravitt join us, and she's going to be sharing the generational differences in the workplace. And there's 5 different generations that are currently in today's workplace. So what are the differences, similarities, how do they get along, what works well? So I hope you can join us for that session. But thank you, everyone, for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And take care.